today, but if at any time you have a question, please raise your hand. We're more than willing to unmute and give you access to your mic if you have any questions for the presenters today. And then, of course, use the chat whenever you feel like you need to. That's fine as well. So with that, I will turn the floor over to our presenters today. And welcome, both of you. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having us, Crystal. So welcome to the Literature Review and Writing Process. My name is Joanna Nemeth, and I'm the Instruction and Reference Librarian here at Athabasca University Library. Sarah Jean, did you want to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good to see some people I know and maybe some new people as well. I'm Sarah Jean Watt, and I'm the coordinator of the Write site, which is our online writing center at AU. Thanks for coming today.
All right, so today we're going to cover what literature reviews are, the different types, and how to prepare for a literature review. So we'll talk about the overall structure from abstract to introduction, background to methodology, and results to discussion and conclusion. Our goal today is to provide you with an array of patterns and strategies and resources to help you approach every aspect of writing and literature review. So I'll start off with the purpose of a literature review, then we'll talk about the different forms they take and their functions. We'll shift into the preparation and process for searching and talk about when to stop looking. Sarah Jean will take us through the structure of a literature review, and then we'll talk about how to find samples. I forgot to click as we were going. Sarah Jean and our colleague Jordan have made a literature review guide that you can refer back to at any point that goes through a lot of this stuff as well. So I will add the link for that in here, and I do not think that worked, but I think Sarah Jean will be able to find a better appropriate link, and then we'll be able to forward that off to you guys. All right, so what is a literature review? This is just a quote we really liked. Literature reviews provide an overview of relevant sources you explored while researching on particular topics and are designed to demonstrate to your readers how your research fits within a larger field of study. We also have a reference list at the end of these slides, so you can refer back to any of these articles if you're interested. Thanks, Sarah Jean. She added the correct link in there. All right, so if we think about scholarly research as discourse or conversation, a literature review can be thought of as capturing the parts of a conversation that are relevant to your topic and setting the scene for your research. A literature review usually consists of a summary and synthesis. Summaries capture the important information from the course, and the synthesis frames the research problem within the current research and informs how you intend to investigate the problem. The analytical features of a literature review might capture the current state, of the research in an area, discuss works in context of their contributions to the area of research, identify relationships between works, identify thematic or conceptual divisions in the research, such as key schools of thought or key debates, positions on an argument, present a chronological progression of the research on a topic, or reinterpret older material, or merge old and new interpretations. So the key features of a literature review identify where gaps exist within the current field of research and locate your own research within the context of existing literature. Where does your paper fit into this, and why is it important? So now we get into the forms and functions. So literature reviews come in many forms and have many possible functions. They can appear within the academic papers, where they frame the current study or paper. We find reviews in theses and dissertations, where they usually come as chapters. Both of the above answer the why this topic, why this approach question. We also have lit reviews created as standalone papers. So there are many types of literature reviews. We'll go over some of the most common ones. So a historical literature review examines research over time to show progression or evolution of ideas. Argumentative literature reviews are intended to establish contrarian viewpoints by positioning literature to refute or support arguments, assumptions, or problems noted in the existing literature. Integrative reviews generate new frameworks or perspectives through a detailed critique and synthesis process. These reviews should have an exhaustive literature search, meaning all literature on the topic should be covered. Through integrative reviews, follow methodologically sound processes for primary research, including meeting standards for rigor and replication. Theoretical reviews are used to establish what theories exist, how theories are related, and have they been investigated. Often used to show inadequacies of current theory or for emerging research problems. Methodological reviews focus on how research was done, not necessarily the findings. So not what someone says, but how they came to say it. This type of review highlights how researchers draw on wide collections of knowledge and use varied approaches to capture and analyze data. This helps highlight disciplinary trends, gaps in data collection, like quantitative or qualitative, and ethical issues to be aware of. And then we've got systematic reviews, which I'm sure you've all had to deal with at some point. They are a standardized methodology and used to prepare an overview of existing evidence. They're used quite a lot in health sciences and are gaining traction in social sciences as well. It requires clearly formed research questions and pre-specified methods to identify and evaluate relevant research. In a systematic review, you carefully document your search, evaluation, and summary. Meta-analyses are an extension of the systematic review process and involve data consolidation steps. So how to prep for a literature review. So let's shift over to how to prepare and get started with your lit review. Start with, just going to do that. So you start with articulating your question or problem. What topic are you studying? What do you know about it? And what do you want to know? Then you form a research question or hypothesis. Begin your literature search, find materials relevant to your topic or hypothesis, and fill in information gaps. This will likely be an iterative process: problem, search, read, review, refine, search, etc. If you need help developing your search and you missed our session last week, we also have a short guide on that called Search Like a Pro that you can find in this list. So if we get into evaluating, this is evaluating the items you find. Is your literature relevant, significant, key to the discourse? Are you missing key authors? Check out the literature review for the works you have. Are there common authors listed? Do you have those authors in your collection? I like to use the CRAFT framework to evaluate sources. So we look at currency. Does the date affect the validity of the conclusions? Relevance. Is the paper relevant to your topic and significant in the discussion on your research problem? Accuracy. Are the claims, arguments based on reliable and valid data sources? Are you able to check? How transparent is the methodology, data collection, and analysis process? Authority. Who are the authors? What experience or expertise do they have, and is it relevant to the discourse? And purpose. Is it objective? What do you think was the intention of writing this? So begin your analysis and interpretation. See if the gaps can be filled as you analyze and interpret. And this is where we start to ask ourselves when to stop looking. So, how do you know if you've thoroughly reviewed the literature you found? Have you found everything you can at the time? So look for repeating patterns. If the same thing is being said just by different people, then this likely demonstrates that the research problem has hit a conceptual dead end. At this point, consider, does your study extend current research? Does it forge a new path, or does it merely add more of the same thing that's already been said? Look at sources the authors cite in their works. Do you see the same authors being cited in each paper? This is often an indication that no new ideas have been generated to address the research problem. And then citation tracking is another thing you can take a look at. So Scopus, Web of Science, and Google Scholar all have this cited by feature. We do go over how to follow up with cited by in the Search Like a Pro guide that I linked in there. But you can see if the same authors are being cited again and again, this may indicate no new literature has been written on the topic. And now we have some time for questions while Sarah Jean takes over the PowerPoint for the next section.
Great, looks like we've got some questions coming in. Crystal, do you mind if I give access to the mic there?
Oh, yes, sorry. Here, I can do that. There we go. Okay, Pratt? Yeah, you can use your mic now.
Hi, good afternoon. How are you?
Good, thanks. Good to have you.
Thank you. I do have a question. So when I'm doing my research and I'm submitting it to the prof, what would be, I guess my general synopsis of this is, what would be the expectation limit-wise, page-wise, roughly? Like, what would be the ideal, I guess, kind of scope for those kind of documents when we're submitting them?
I can start this if you want, Sarah Jean, and then you can add in anything. It really depends on your topic. Like sometimes you'll have a topic that there have literally only been maybe 7 articles published on. Like if you're looking at something really niche, it's really kind of up to probably what your prof's assignment requires. So it would be really worth talking to the prof to see, because sometimes I know, like I did a literature review on those experiencing homelessness and their information-seeking needs. There wasn't really anything specifically about that, so what I had to do was pull information about those experiencing homelessness and then information about information-seeking needs and kind of tie those together. I put in some news articles that had to do with the areas I was interested in, but it was definitely a lot of wiggle room and a lot of conversations with my prof about what other areas I can go into and that kind of thing.
Yeah, agreed. It will always depend.
And then, as I said earlier, you'll start to notice like repeating citations. You'll be like, oh, everyone's citing Finkelman, and you'll start to notice you're not finding anything new. That's usually a good point of being like, okay, I found everything there is on this topic.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good question.
Yeah, go ahead, Melissa.
Hi there. Thank you for taking my question. I actually have just a couple of quick questions. The audio cut out when you mentioned the resource for defining your question. Was that the Search Like a Pro resource?
Oh, shoot. It was. I hope that didn't cut out for everyone. Yeah, that just goes over. It's kind of like an asynchronous short course on developing your research question. We did a session on it last week. So
perfect.
I will also put the recording up hopefully soon.
Great, thank you. And then along the same line as Prad's question there, if we do decide that we have to expand our initial research question, so for instance, initially I'm searching PN and simulation, but there's very limited research. How do we accurately document that we've expanded our search terms, or what's the best way to track that?
I'm not exactly sure what you mean. I would think journaling your search, which we'll talk about next week, so different ways to journal your search would probably be the best way to go about that, because you just basically need to, usually you put in the after notes of your paper that the different searches you tried so that it can be replicated if that's the direction you're going. So
Okay.
yeah, I don't know if you have anything else to add there, Sarah Jean.
Just possibly that when we get to the methodology section, you might learn a little bit more, Melissa. That would help.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
And Gabriella also had a question. I don't know if you saw that, Joanna. For a literature review or systematic review, they have to cite the databases used for the search. Can students search through the AU library through specific databases?
Yeah, I'll add in, we have an FAQ on how to find databases because it's a question we get several times a day. It has images to show you how to do everything too. Thanks for being so interactive, everyone. Should we do this last question and then move on?
Sounds good. Oh, it looks like they put down their hand. Dawn, did you still have a question? Okay, well, maybe we can go on, and then Dawn, if you do have a question, then we'll have another question break shortly. Oh, yeah, and if your mic isn't working, oh, I think maybe Crystal just needs to give you access to it. Oh, yes. Yeah, we can share the presentation. Joanna and I just sent the updated presentation to Crystal right beforehand, so Crystal should be sharing that later on.
Yes, I will.
Thanks, Crystal. Okay. Now, Joanna, I just want to ask, does it still look normal on your end?
Yes, it does. Like
Okay.
It looks like you took over and moved it to a different slide. So.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to go over all the elements that you might include in your literature review. So most, though not all, will be relevant to all cases. Really, you're the writer and the most knowledgeable person on your topic, so you can decide or, talk to your professor, like we were saying earlier. You could also get input from a writing coach, or if you have a supervisor because you're working on your thesis, and so on. So here are the components of a typical literature review: a title page, an abstract and possibly a preface, introduction, background, methodology, review or results, discussion and or conclusion, and references. So I won't discuss the title page or the references section, but I'll focus mainly on introduction, review or results, and discussion. And Joanna will jump in to talk to you about methodology. Throughout all sections of your review, you should always keep in mind your research question. Make sure to relate in some clear way to the research questions, starting with the abstract and introduction, and moving through to all sections of the review, even all paragraphs. If you find you have too much material after writing a first draft, you can ask yourself at each section and each paragraph whether it relates strongly enough to your research question. And if it doesn't, that's a signal you may want to cut it. The abstract, as with any paper, is a short summary of the entire review. So there are no secrets in the abstract. It actually includes your overall findings and conclusions. This is one reason that the abstract is written after the review is complete, to fully capture the contents of the review and its conclusions. A reader should be able to read the abstract and understand the overall contents of your review without reading the review itself. And the abstract also often includes keywords used to obtain the literature found. Now, if you find it a more straightforward approach, you can even break your abstract down into short sections, as this one does. So for example, you might include objective or purpose, scope, design and methods, results, and recommendations or conclusions. You might include a sentence or two for each major component included in the review. And note that even though this looks like bullet points, be sure to write only in full sentences. You may not need to include an abstract depending on your assignment specifications. For example, for an undergraduate paper, you may not need to, but your instructor or professor will let you know. Double check with them if you're not sure, especially at the graduate level. The preface is optional. And so though a preface is not always or even usually included in a literature review, HART actually recommends including one if it will give insight into how and why you chose your topic. A preface includes information that you would like to share with the reader, but doesn't have direct bearing on the research. So for example, it could be a personal statement about the research's relationship to your background. It can also touch on who your intended audience is, as well as the scope and intention of your research. All of this can provide context to your readers so they understand the motivation behind the review. And the preface would be placed on the page after the abstract and would look something like this example. On to introductions. You shouldn't expect to perfect your introduction in a first draft. The purpose of an introduction at the beginning of the writing process is just to ensure that you understand your own purpose for the review. You know, drafting an introduction is a way for you as the writer to set the stage for your writing, not a complete polished introduction to the review for the audience. It's best practice to revise it with the audience in mind once you have written the body. So once the introduction is complete, here are 5 basic things that it will achieve. Announce the topic of your review. Do this in a way that grabs the audience's attention, hooks the reader in. State the purpose of your review. The audience should understand clearly what objectives the review will accomplish. This could also identify the gap that you're investigating through the review. Explain the relevance of the topic. The introduction will make clear the significance of the topic so that you can demonstrate why it's worth discussing. Establish your credibility. Through your opening statements, the reader should come to realize that you have a deep understanding of the topic, and so you have the expertise to discuss it in detail. And finally, preview the main points that you will make in the main body of the text. Describe the overall organization of the review, for example, what sections it contains, and show why your chosen structure is appropriate. In the Yan et al. Article that we saw the abstract of earlier, remember with those bullet point looking things, this is the same article. You can see some of the parts of an introduction at work. So first, they announced their topic of geriatric education of undergraduate nurses. Next, they spend a good portion of the space demonstrating the relevance of the topic by explaining the gap that exists in the geriatric nursing curriculum. They establish their credibility throughout, for example, by referencing major studies or other work on the topic, as well as just by showing that they understand their topic by discussing it in a clear manner. They end on their purpose, to examine the effectiveness of a nursing education program that includes a specific geriatric component. This introduction doesn't preview all the main points of the body, though the abstract did that by clearly laying out the different sections of the paper and the main point demonstrated in each. However, their list of knowledge, attitude, and working intention here lays out 3 themes that are identified and expanded upon in the review and discussion, with the literature categorized into those 3 in order to draw out specific findings. You should do the same and identify the themes that arose from your research. We'll talk more about how to identify themes later. As Garson explains, including a background section is useful for showing how the topic has gained significance over time. Imagine the issue you're investigating as developing through time and being responded to by other experts in your field. In the background section, you have, in a way, begun your review of the literature, but you may be focused on foundational texts and foundational research at this point. This includes what Garson calls the historical response of the academic community, along with milestone studies and sources that define the topic but don't contribute directly to the more specific conversation of your research question. As you move into the review section itself, you'll be focusing on more research that has a direct bearing on your specific topic or question, whereas the background section gives an overview of the more general research related to the topic, especially through a historical lens. Yan et al.'s background section shows how this can be done. They begin with how the topic has gained and is gaining significance over time by showing the rapid growth of the aging population and the shortfall of nurses that can't keep up. They show the contributions of foundational texts on the topic, referencing the work of numerous commissions, institutes, foundations, and associations. They then detail the milestone studies that perhaps don't speak directly to their research question of the effectiveness of the program with a geriatric care component, but that do speak to the general lack of geriatric care components and the reasons nursing students might choose areas other than geriatric care to study. And they end by returning to the significance of the research question or gap by showing why the research is needed, given the history of the topic. Okay, so let's review these initial components of the literature review with a short true or false quiz. So you can put your answers of T and F in the chat. So first, is this true or false? You should think of the review as a cohesive whole centered around your research question. Would that be true or false? Oh, good. I'm seeing lots of T's. That's correct. It's true. How about the abstract should be written before the review is complete? Okay, seeing some F's. And you're right, that's false. You'll have to wait until after you've written your review to know how to summarize it. Okay, how about this one? The introduction announces the review's topic, states the review's purpose, and explains the topic's relevance. But true or false? Uh-oh, I'm getting some falses on this one. All falses. We better have a conversation about this. Oh, okay, my chat's just behind. Now I'm seeing the T's. The F's were for the last one. Okay.
I was going to hop in and say that. I was like, I'm saying all T's.
Okay, good. You're right. Yes, that's exactly the different things that your introduction should accomplish. And how about this one? The background uses foundational texts and milestone studies to show how the topic has gained significance over time. Still seeing some T's, so that's great. Okay, thanks for your participation, everybody. Now, are there any questions coming up about what we've covered so far about the structure of a literature review? We're going to move on to methodology shortly, but these are the sections that would lead up to the methodology. Gabriella said no questions. Thanks, Gabriella.
Awesome. We'll have more time for questions as we're going. So if there's nothing pressing now, we can continue on. Perhaps I'm happy to see everyone interacting so much. So that was a great activity, Sarah Jean. All right. So can you see methodology now?
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay, awesome. All right, I'm just switching around my view. Okay, there we go. Okay, so we'll move on to methods now. In your methods section, you'll want to address what you did, how you did it, and why. Tell your readers about your intentions, what happened, any changes or shifts that happened, and why that happened. That's an area that I know was a question last time. Did you run into any obstacles, and what were they? How did it all get resolved, or what did you end up doing? Keep it brief but informative. So you'll want to take diligent note-taking, and we'll talk more about note-taking in our session next week to give you some more details of ways you can go about that, but make sure to keep track of what you searched, where you searched, what you found or did not find, and consider including reflective pieces as you search, not simply the keywords and the numbers found, but your thoughts as you search and scan results. You might want to take, this will be in our journaling your search section next week, but you might want to take notes of like, oh, I see I found a lot about this area, but it seems like there's a lot of gaps in this area with this search, or that type of thing. If you're searching in Medline and you think to yourself, wait, all these good articles are from the same journal, I should check that out. Make sure to write that down. It's very easy to forget those types of things. So you can keep track of these thoughts, and they can help you when you are writing up your methods section. I will stay on this slide for another moment. If you're doing an integrative or systematic review or meta-analysis, you'll need to be even more detailed in your note-taking process. For those method sections, your readers will expect to see a summary of all the steps noted on the graphic here. Selection criteria, search description, the collection and assessment process, and how you identified the data needed for your information results. For the selection criteria, we want to know how you decided what studies were included and excluded, so the types of participants, interventions, measures. The search description needs to be meticulously documented so it can be assessed and replicated. Important to keep in mind. Your full search strategy should be provided within the paper. A full search strategy summary should include all sources searched, databases, websites, any hand searched like journals or conference proceedings, all gray literature reviews or gray literature sources, any people or organizations contacted, all dates of the last search for each database and the limiters used. So those would include things like the period searched, as well as any language or publication status restrictions. The full search strategies for each database should be included in your appendix. So data collection and analysis should include how studies were selected for inclusion in the review, how study data were extracted from the study reports, and how study data were combined for analysis and synthesis. Consider using a flow diagram in your reporting. Sorry, I accidentally clicked on a link there. It can be used to capture the number of studies found, assessed, excluded, and included. It's a great way to share with your readers the volume of literature found and considered. All right, for the last part of your methods section, you should address study quality and bias. Assessments of study quality are linked to the risk of bias, and the Cochrane risk bias tool shown here is the one used most often for that. So the first part of the tool judges the risk of bias based on what was reported in the study, and the second part assigns a risk of bias rating. The ratings are low, high, or unclear. Cochrane also has a tool to assess the risk of bias in the risk of bias tool. It's a crucial step, requires rigorous assessment and thorough documentation as these studies form the basis of your results. And now I'll let Sarah Jean move on to our next section, review of results. And while she's shifting over, we can allow any questions that anyone's got.
Looks pretty quiet at the moment. Okay, well, I'll just keep going, and you can pop your question in the chat if you have one. We can answer you shortly, or go ahead and raise your hand.
Oh.
Oh, go ahead.
There was Melissa that had her hand raised, so she's back. There we go. Go ahead, Melissa.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, I feel like this is a very basic question that I should probably know the answer to, but when we go into just the main My AU, like Discover library search, is that considered a database, or would you include that if that were the way you started out searching, or should you always go to those sort of individual databases to start your search?
Okay, first of all, I'm just going to note the person who asked about journaling your search. I'll see, we do have a link for more information on journaling your search, so I'll add that link to the chat in a few minutes, but I'll answer you first. So the main search from the library homepage, the tricky thing about those, they're not usually recommended for literature reviews. One of the big problems with them is that it's really hard to replicate those searches because the Discover search is also searching the library catalog, which includes books, which you probably don't need for your search. So if you were using the scholarly articles tab, the problem with those, like what we call a one search or discovery search tool, is that they're changing so much all the time because they're always just like bringing in new subscriptions and changing what they're linking to. So it's very hard to replicate them. So they're not typically used in like higher level literature reviews. I did I think it was called a realist review, but it was using a lot of systematic review processes this year. And I don't remember if we ended up using it because it's kind of one of those things where we tried to sort out which databases were not being included to see if we needed to use that one. And we do have, if you email, I can email you a list of criteria you can use to sort out, or if we have time at the end, to take a look at what it is searching. But it's kind of iffy to use in that way because they do change a lot. So it's not recommended. If you do want to use an EBSCO search tool, I would recommend using one that's more subject specific. Plus, they also really, the EBSCO search tool here, scholarly articles or Discover, their advanced search features are really limited. So if you're doing more of a subject-specific search, you're going to get a lot better advanced search features in a subject-specific database like CINAHL if you're in the sciences, or if you're in health studies, or PsycInfo if you're in psychology, are going to have a lot better limiters that are more subject-specific.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much for that.
We do get a lot of questions about it, so it's definitely not a dumb question at all. Don't worry.
Yeah, and that was an excellent answer. Thanks, Joanna.
Oh, good. I thought it was a little rambly, so.
No, I learned something, so that's great. Rebecca asked, this is a bit of an odd question. If we are conducting research for a class that's not related to our major, but would like to complete research related to our major area of study, is this typically acceptable if the topic is not explicitly stated by our class? So I'm thinking this would be in a case where you kind of have like an open topic for your assignment. Probably you're just going to want to run your idea by your instructor or professor. I mean, a lot of fields can be interdisciplinary, so there's a lot of room for doing that kind of overlap. It might just be that, you know, you're bringing in a different topic that's maybe not usually covered, but you're going to look at it kind of through the lens of your current course. But you will want to talk to your professor about that. Joanna, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think talking to your professor about it's a good way to go about it. I know some of the common interdisciplinary ones we get are like a lot of nursing students end up doing some education research for training future nurses, and that kind of can tie into like either the ed field or the business field. So it is quite common to have some interdisciplinary stuff going on within your searching. So I would say acceptable, but always good to check.
Definitely. And Rebecca had also asked about taking and tracking notes, and Joanna put in the chat that that's what we'll talk about next week. So remember to register for our Keeping Organized as You Search webinar as well. That'll be at the same time next week. Okay, great questions. Okay, so through the inclusion of a methodology section, you can see how the literature review is truly a type of research in itself. You're not just reporting what others have found, but are actually conducting your own research to obtain some result. And this is why Aviard suggests that the review section actually be called results. Your review is the result of your research. However, this is not just random reporting of accumulated data. You need to identify the themes within your research so you can structure your review in a way that presents the themes that emerged in a logical order. Aviard suggests to begin with the most dominant theme and discuss the following themes thereafter. So in the next slides, we'll explore some ways that you can determine the themes or topics that you'll organize your review around. And these include questions the literature review can answer, analysis and synthesis, and comparison and contrast. But first, let's take another look at Joanna et al. This is their results section, and it shows what it can look like to subdivide the results into themes presented in that logical order. So in addition to presenting the data in tables, Joanna et al. Expanded on categories of significant findings, seen here in yellow. Not sure if you can see my cursor there. So we've got geriatric knowledge outcome, geriatric attitude outcome, and geriatric working intention outcome. These were the three themes we saw listed at the end of the introduction when Joanna et al. Laid out a partial preview of their main points. And in blue, you can see the explanation of what each category consists of. So for example, in 4.4, the geriatric knowledge outcome, that theme is made up of 3 studies and their findings of statistically significant improvement in knowledge scores after the intervention of the program. And in 4.5, 11 studies were relevant, and their overall findings are presented before going into more detail about each study. So this isn't the only way to present information in the review or results portion, but it can provide a guide for what your review might look like. And if you're not sure where to start your review section, it can help to have an idea of what types of questions the literature review can answer. This can give you an idea of what your literature review can accomplish. And as you can see in this figure from Hart, there are several possible answers that your audience can learn by reading your review. Not all will be relevant to every review, but some of the basics include, what are the key sources? This is just the very basic starter question. What are the key theories, concepts, and ideas? Within the key sources, what key ideas emerge? Here's where you'll want to see what various sources have in common. What are the main questions and problems that have been addressed to date? Some fundamental questions and problems of the early development of the subject may appear in your background section, but as the questions and problems become more specific to your own research question, you'll want to record them in your results section. Another question is, how is knowledge on the topic structured or organized? This one is a bit trickier, but you can also ask yourself what types of data you've gathered. Is it subjective or objective? Is it quantitative or qualitative, and so on? You could also determine whether your main topic has been divided into subtopics by the various researchers who've come before. What are the origins and definitions of the topic? The question of the topic's origin may partially be addressed in the background section, but again, you'll be getting more specific here. So you may still need to address the origins of the more specific aspects of the question, like any keywords or concepts that weren't covered in the general historical approach of the background. This one also hints that it's a good idea to define your terms as they're defined by the research you've gathered. What are the major issues and debates about the topic? Are there any major contrasts in findings of different researchers? What are the things researchers can and can't agree on? What challenges have they faced in conducting their research? What external issues play a role? Identifying and explaining major issues and debates surrounding your topic is a key way to generate the material of your review or results section. And finally, taking these questions as a whole, how have approaches to these questions increased our understanding and knowledge? This may be the part where you begin your own analysis and highlight a gap. Perhaps there's a point of learning that has not yet been identified in the literature when considering all the texts together. This is truly the reason for conducting a literature review. Reading and comparing all the texts together can provide insight that no one else has realized yet. In fact, as Hart mentions, conducting the literature review can actually help you in this way to narrow your topic for a larger project. How to make the literature review your own, how to explain or recast the information you've collected can be confusing when it may seem as though the data simply speaks for itself, but it doesn't. It's up to you to analyze and synthesize it as the aim of your review. Hart gives insights into how to do this. With analysis, the key words are select, differentiate, dissect, and break up. Analysis is the initial action you do to the data you've gathered. To select, you choose what is relevant. To differentiate, you understand how the different data compares. To dissect, you examine the data carefully to understand it. And to break it up, you group it into subtopics. In synthesis, the key words are integrate, combine, reorganize, and recast. Synthesis is done on the parts that are discovered through analysis. When you integrate and combine the parts, you start putting them back together according to their relationships with each other. You reorganize them into a different order than they were originally presented. And you recast them by putting them in a different light than they were originally presented in. To differentiate and integrate your sources, comparison and contrast can be useful processes. Hart provides a worksheet template that can be used to help organize data into different topics before combining and recasting it in your writing. There's a link to this template on our handout, and I believe Crystal will be sending that out afterwards. The template is designed for the use of multiple sources at once, and it allows you to group sources by topic and explore their similarities and differences. This, in turn, gives you a way to structure your review by theme or topic. You start with the template by choosing the topic and entering a key concept word or phrase. Then put the author and date of a particular source that is relevant to the topic at the top of each column. You can complete this table for each key concept or topic that your review could explore. And it's okay to use the same source on multiple tables, as it may be relevant to multiple topics. You can also change the category names in this first column over here, just how it suits your own research. It's really up to you. This is just to give you a starting place. And then fill out each column for the source listed at the top. That's it. You're on your way to better understanding the relationship between the sources, as well as organizing your paper into sections with headings based on key concepts. So after the review is complete, your job is not quite done yet. You still have to discuss the findings and present your conclusions. Just as you've probably seen in many journal articles, the results section is followed by a discussion section. This is the author's chance to interpret the results within the context of their research question. Here are some guidelines of what you'll want to accomplish in your discussion section. Interpret the results. Aviard mentions to discuss all aspects of the results. So in other words, make sure no part of the data from the review or results section goes uncovered in the discussion section. As I mentioned before, sometimes you may have accumulated excess data that's not as relevant to your research question. And if at this point you can't find a way to interpret or discuss some particular data, this could be another hint that it's excess. Now, another note is to not introduce any new information in the discussion. Here you can interpret and analyze the data presented in the review or results, but no new data should appear. All the relevant data should appear in the review or results section if you'd like to discuss it in your discussion section. Develop your argument. Remember, you should always return to your research question and seek to answer it. Emphasize the main findings and their meaning for your argument. How do they help to prove or support your answer to the research question? And later we'll talk about different patterns you can use to build your argument logically. In the discussion, you'll also critique and evaluate. From an unbiased perspective, you'll need to critically evaluate the literature's strengths and weaknesses as well as your own. This means also acknowledging your review's limitations. And make recommendations. Based on all the findings together, draw your conclusions about what should be done. The argumentation patterns that we'll look at will help you to do this in a logical way that relates to your research question. But first, let's look at Joanna et al. Again. At the beginning of their discussion section, Joanna et al. Provide a mini introduction that very briefly summarizes the method and purpose of the review, then states their main finding in green, when the data of all of the relevant literature is taken into account. This is what their finding was. Like their results section, Joanna et al.'s discussion section is broken down into several subsections, the headings highlighted in yellow. The first three reflect the three major themes presented in the results. However, this time, instead of focusing solely on the studies, the overall findings are interpreted for their meaning to the author's research question. For example, in 5.2, Geriatric Attitude Outcome, the authors begin by declaring their surprise at the medium to high overall attitude score within the studies. Now they're discussing and evaluating the findings within the context of their own research. Other subsections Joanna et al. Included in their discussion in yellow are the impacts of clinical placement, the necessity of geriatric education guidelines in improving educational outcomes, the impacts of variation in standardized metrics, and the implications for nursing education. You can see from these headings that the discussion is heating up, and the authors are now discussing the implications and significance of their findings. They evaluate and critique the literature, as well as make recommendations in pink. They're stating what should be done based on their findings. Joanna et al. Also included a separate subsection within their discussion for their review's limitations to ensure that they're being forthright and giving a clear picture of any potential weaknesses to their research. So now let's talk about structuring your argument. In terms of structuring your discussion section to successfully argue your main idea, there are several possible patterns that you could start from to find what's most effective in your particular case. The most basic structure moves from problem to solution and includes the disadvantages of the problem, the advantages of the solution, and refutation of possible objections to the proposed solution. This could also be as simple as identifying a gap, then filling the gap. The discussion or conclusion will likely give you the opportunity to focus on the solution and filling of the gap. As you move toward filling the gap, you'll likely cover the disadvantages of nothing being done, the advantages of addressing the gap, and refutation of objections to your proposed method of addressing the gap. You can think of the argument structure as in play throughout your entire paper, but it's especially important in the discussion section because the discussion focuses in many ways on the recommendations you've settled on through the course of your research. Here's an adaptation of Hart's argumentation patterns. The first is the problem awareness pattern, which moves from problem to solution. First, identify the problem or gap. Next, show the negative effects of that problem or gap. Then explain the consequences if the problem is not solved or the gap is not filled. And finally, outline recommendations to address it. The next is the cause and effect pattern. This pattern aims to solve the problem by zeroing in on the cause you have identified and eliminating unlikely causes. Start by establishing the existence of the problem. Then eliminate any improbable or irrelevant causes. This may mean refuting causes that others have put forward or commonly believe. Next, focus attention on your proposed cause, and then recommend a course of action to address the problem. And finally, here is Hart's possible solution pattern. And remember, you don't need to follow all of these. These are just starting places to help you to structure your discussion section. I've called this the alternative solution pattern. This pattern aims to propose alternative solutions to a problem whose attempts at resolution have so far failed. So first, show why solutions already tried were inadequate. Then consider, compare, and narrow the alternatives. And finally, give recommendations for alternative approaches. You can see in all three of these patterns how the argument is built by identifying or describing some kind of problem or gap and gradually moving toward addressing or providing a solution for the problem or gap. The solution comprises your recommendations or conclusions. Almost done. In order to show why previous solutions are inadequate and previously identified causes are irrelevant, you may engage in criticism and evaluation of the literature you've gathered. For studies that support your own conclusions, you also need to take a critical perspective of them and evaluate them for their structure and limitations. So as you do so, remember to remain objective and unbiased to preserve the reliability of your work. Criticism can comprise agreeing or disagreeing with a position and showing with evidence why you agree or disagree. You must then defend your position. So again, give the evidence for the strength of your position while refuting possible counterarguments. And you may want to recognize the strengths and weaknesses of the literature you've reviewed and are now discussing. Remember, you must address the strengths, weaknesses, and limitations of your own critique and review. I'm just going to skip this slide because we're running out of time. So your conclusion can actually be part of the discussion section, or it could be its own brief section. But this is your final opportunity to emphasize your main idea, the answer to your research question, as well as to leave an impression on the reader about the significance of your findings and recommendations. As with any conclusion, it's good practice to include the following points as laid out by Garson. A reminder of the research question or problem, why it's significant to solve the problem, and how the research presented plays a role in the solution. This is also a way of saying how your review makes an original contribution to your field through the filling of a gap. And in order to assert the recommendations in a straightforward manner, state what should be done considering the data presented in the results. Notice that the word should implies a recommendation of action that is preferable but may not yet have been taken. Okay, we had a quiz here, but we better keep going forward because we only have 2 minutes left. Just a reminder that we do have our course that you can review all of this material in. It would probably take under an hour. But we've also got some interactive exercises in there for you to kind of test if you picked up on all the information, and just an engaging way to kind of set it in your brain. Joanna, did you want to go on and squeeze in the samples?
No, I don't think so. It comes up in the Search Like a Pro process, so just about limiting your methodology if you're looking for specifically like literature reviews or systematic reviews, that kind of thing. And yeah, you can always contact us if you need more information about that, and I think we can just maybe leave the last minute for questions. If anyone has questions.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, fortunately, we had some great questions already as we went through. Well, if you do have questions, sorry, Joanna, I was just going to say, if you have questions about writing your literature review or writing any kind of a research paper, then you can email us at the right site, or I'll also put the link to the right site in the chat as well.
Oh, and I was just going to say it's nice to have questions during the presentation, so that works well.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you both so much for today. And I will pop in the chat here the registration link for the next event, which one do we have next? On the 15th is the the 8th. February 8th is our next session.
No, we have one next week.
January 25th. Sorry. January 25th is session 3, and that is keeping organized as you search. So that's going to be a very interesting session as well. So you're going to want to come out to that one. I'll throw the link in the chat here so you can register for that if you haven't yet. And that's the link to register for the next one. So yes, thank you both so much. Appreciate everything today. And again, the recording will be available on the library website at some point, and it's also going to be available in this chat after the presentation is over. You'll actually find a link to the recording. So yes, thank you both so much. Looking forward to our next session, and have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, Crystal, and thanks everyone for coming out.
Yeah, thanks. You're a great audience.
Sarah Jean, do you see the question about editing in the chat? I think that would be for the right site.
For sure. Yeah, I can answer that in the chat now.
And yes, I'll be sending the slides from today out to all presenters shortly here, so everyone has access to those.
And feel free to email us if you come up with any questions as you're going through the process as well, and hopefully we'll see you next week.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
All right, thanks everyone.